Hello, everyone, and good evening. This presentation, which is going to be all about understanding your PSAT scores, how to read and interpret your score report. And we'll also use this as a greater conversation into looking at some factors in college admission. My name is Kathy Hart. I'm an educational consultant and also a test prep tutor as well for Score at the Top Learning Centers and schools. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and you can put any questions in the chat. Jason is keeping an eye on things in the background, and he'll be answering those and also checking in with us at the end of tonight's presentation. All right, so let me go in and let's get started with tonight's presentation. So, of course, we are broadcasting and recording live. So in case there are any technical difficulties, if you need to leave early, we always have this and many other our SCORE webinars site. And speaking of which, we have some great downloads. You don't need to have these in front of you in order to follow along with tonight's presentation, but it gives you some good resources that are complementary to the topics that I'll be covering this evening. All right, so let's get in. All right, so first of all, on the screen right now, you can see a list of the top 10 most important factors in college admissions as determined by the Independent Educational Consulting Association each year after interviewing many college admissions officers. Rounding out the top 3 are a set of solid SAT or ACT scores. Now you might be saying, well, wait a minute, didn't a lot of colleges go test optional? And indeed, that was certainly the case. Back in the fall of 2020, when during the pandemic, students were unable to find a testing center, didn't feel comfortable taking a test on site. Many colleges and responded to this by going test optional, and indeed to this day, right around 1,700 colleges have stayed test optional. Test optional means. So when a college says that it has adopted a test optional policy, it means that they are de-emphasizing the use of SAT and ACT scores when making admissions decisions. However, it doesn't mean that they are test blind. If a school, you could send a 1600, a 36 on the ACT, and the college would not use those scores as part of your admissions factors. Nonetheless, colleges say if you do send test scores, yes, they absolutely will look at them and they will use them. Now, one of the regional landscape is that admission has become significantly, and in most cases, more competitive for test optional schools. More students apply, and colleges without a set of scores, colleges will place more emphasis on other parts of the application to include curriculum, overall grades, essays, letters of recommendation, and the student's extracurricular involvement. And at the end of the day, you decide whether or not to submit scores. And not all colleges have released data, but some who have seem to indicate that non-submitters are submitters. Now, for parents, I know our audience is primarily made up of parents of 9th, 10th, maybe some 11th graders, maybe some younger students, some 8th graders do take the PSAT. And if you're curious, well, when my student gets around to actually applying to college, will these schools still be tested? One of the best resources out there is www.fairtest.org, and they update which colleges are test optional, required tests, or maybe test blind, or that also may be test flexible. So this is a great resource, and again, it's updated. Now, many of the students that we work with, and I know likely much of our audience, are Florida students and their families. So Florida's 12 state universities never went test optional, and indeed the popular Bright Future Scholarship also requires get some of the data from both of those, both of the Florida schools and also Bright Futures a little later in this presentation. And just to briefly show you some of the data from the 2022 admit rates, in certain instances, the admit rate for submits not submitters with significantly high rate for non-submitters. And so what this tells us is, first of all, we don't know which colleges are going to remain test optional for this year's current class of juniors, so the class of 2024, for our sophomores, class of 2025, for our freshmen. But what we do never go wrong with a strong set of scores. They will always be a plus factor, even in the face of test optional. Now, just to why am I sharing that information? As we talk about the PSAT, the PSAT is one of the first stepping stones and their families often use as they start thinking about college admissions. And it's a great way to start thinking about, am I going to take an SAT? Am I going to take an ACT? And maybe I'm going to stick with a test optional plan. And so we're going to go dive a little bit deeper into those choices later on. But let's start talking about the PSAT, which is the star of tonight's webinar. So first of all, the PSAT is a shorter and easier version of the SAT. You're going to see that there's a lot of similarities between both tests. And it's in fact a nickname. The name is the Preliminary SAT, the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, say that 3 times fast, which is sponsored by the College Board and the National Merit Scholarship Corporation. And so juniors who took the PSAT this year and who received a cutoff score for that prestigious scholarship competition. Now, you might be asking yourself, why should I take the PSAT? And so first of all, it's a great way to prepare for the SAT. A lot of times when I'm sitting down with students that I might be working with as a test prep instructor, PSAT results, and I'll ask the students, did you like the PSAT? Did you like the format? It gives you a great jump start on college planning because it can help you predict what your SAT scores might look like, or give you insight into areas you need to improve, both for testing purposes, but also for academic readiness. The PSAT score report gives a lot of data that helps you understand what are your academic strengths and what might be some areas that you need to improve upon as you move through your high school. For juniors, this is the only way to enter the National Merit Scholarship Competition. Actually, I shouldn't say the only way, but it is because there are exceptions, but certainly it's the most common way. This is also a great way to start college research because you're going to be taking the PSAT. You're going to start receiving lots of information from different colleges, both in your email inbox and also in your physical mailbox as well too. So it's a really great way to broaden the net as it is and discover some colleges that might be really great matches or fits for you, but you might not have heard of until after taking the PSAT and receiving some information. All right, so moving on, let's start looking at the PSAT scores and thinking about what they mean. So you're going to see on my screen right now, you're going to see that the PSAT and the SAT share a common score scale. And because the PSAT is a slightly easier test, those scales are lower. So you can see right here on my screen, we've got the SAT and these are for the for the verbal, what we call the verbal, which is the reading and writing, and what we call the math. Those sections will receive scores of 200 to 800. For students taking the PSAT NMSQT or the PSAT 10, that score is going to be a little lower, ranging from 160 to 760 for each of those sections. Taking a PSAT 8 or a PSAT 9, that scale is going to be even a little bit more lower, with scores ranging per section from 120 to 720. Now, in fact, when we look at, do a deep dive into sample PSAT score report momentarily, you're going to see that you receive 15 scores and subscores. So that's a lot of data. That's a lot of information. Now, the ones that students and their families are primarily interested in are going to be these 3 primary scores. So there's first going to be a writing section score, then there's going to be a mathematics section score, and then the total score is going to be the sum of the above two section scores. You total up your reading and writing plus your math score, and that's how you're going to get your total score. And then there's going to be 12 insights to help you understand your capabilities and areas that you might need to work on, whether for a future PSAT and SAT or in your high school classes. Now let's look at the PSAT score report. And there's actually two different versions of this. So the first one is your So this is going to give you a nice snapshot and overview of those three primary scores, as well as some of those subsection scores, and give you some insight into your strengths and weaknesses, and also even your test taking skills. And of course, you can always go online, full score report there. If you just go to psat.org/myscore, and you'll get that in the more detailed score report. So let's start out by looking at a sample summary score, a sample summary report. So I can see here those three primary scores that I just mentioned. First is my total score. And it tells me, oh, okay, my total score from a 320 to a 1520 was a 960, and I am in the 51st percentile. My reading and writing score, I was a 520, and I'm in the percentile. And my math score was a 440, and I was in the 31st percentile. Now, let me talk a little bit about what these percentiles are. So this first percentile that you're going to see, and you're going to see a second one on the online score report. This is a national representative, and SAT, or College Board, the parent company of the PSAT and the SAT, tells us that this is derived from a research study of students in 10th or 11th grade and weighted to represent all US students in those grades, regardless of whether they typically take the PSAT. In fact, these scores, if I go back up here, are being compared to this national sample. Now, on your online score report, you're going to see a second percentile that's called a user percentile, and that compares your scores to students who have taken a PSAT in the pre-year. So it tends to be a little bit more, I think, insightful percentile versus this national sample. Now, further breaking down your summary report, so I see my reading and writing score of 520 and my math score of 440. Benchmarks. And these benchmarks are that familiar stoplight. So I've got red, yellow, green, and my score is compared to those standards, to those benchmarks. So I can see here, if my score falls within the green, then I am on track to be ready to succeed in your college courses. So I probably have a good foundation based on my reading and writing score to be ready to take a, introduction to, college composition course my first year in college. Now, I notice here that my math score falls in the red. So this tells me one of actually a number of things. Continue to work to strengthen those math scores. I might also want to improve my math skills in order to be successful in math in my high school courses. So this gives me a great piece of information just to think about, okay, what are my academic strengths and what are some areas that I might need to work on? Now, I'm also going to see below these section scores the test scores. So let me explain what these are. So the test scores are in a range of 8 to 38. So reading, I scored a 25. Writing, I scored a 27. Math, I scored a 22. Now, how your PSAT score is in fact determined is it's based on your raw score, which is the total number correct for the reading, the total number correct for the writing and language, and then the total number correct for the two math section. And then those raw score, a test score or a scale score. And then you actually add up both of those scores. So I add up the reading and the writing and add on a 0. And then I add up the math and then add on a 0 as well too. And that's how I get that 520 and that 4. priority. And this is true also for the essay and SAT, have a lot in common. Now, those test scores are also used for the NMSC selection index. Now, what is the NMSC selection index? Well, that's going to be the cutoff that determines, and this is for juniors only. If you're a younger student, you can't qualify for scholarship. But if you meet that cutoff score, and it varies and it goes by state, so there are a little bit more nuanced here. But how you meet it is they're going to calculate a selection index of 12 to 228. And you can see the two formulas on my screen. So you do 2 times the sum of that 8 through 38 reading score, that 8 through 38 writing score, that 8 through 38 math score, or 2 times the reading and writing section score and math score, and then kill the final 0. And that'll be what gives an index. Going further into the summary report, you'll also see your question level feedback. So for each of those 4 subtests, you'll see the total number of questions. You'll see your total number of correct answers, incorrect answers, and also your omitted answers. So looking at this already tells me, okay, I might need to continue to work on my math skills. I already saw that when I was looking at my benchmark earlier. And then maybe if I'm omitting too many questions, I always want to see, well, maybe that can be something that I can work on to improving some of those strategies for a future PSAT or SAT, whether that's learning how to make an educated guess, maybe improving some of the skills that I need to answer certain types of questions. So I've got some great data on this part of the score. And then there is even a further breakdown. Now, of course, we're just showing a screenshot here, so you can see all 4 reading, writing, math calculator, math non-calculator, math calculator. But what you can see here is that when you look at your summary report, you'll see the correct answer, you'll see your answer, and then you'll see the difficulty of the question. And this is also a really great piece of data that I like to use with my students as well too. And students, as you're going through your score, helpful to gain insight into even some of your test taking skills, because I might look at the ones that I missed. And if I'm noticing I'm missing mostly difficult level questions, so those three squares there, well, then maybe that tells me that, I still haven't learned those. I'm going to be progressing through math throughout high school. So I expect the next time I take the PSAT, or maybe when I take the SAT later on in the year, that maybe I'm able to answer more difficult questions. If I'm noticing that I'm maybe missing too many easy questions or too many, that might tell me that maybe I'm rushing through the test, or that I'm making careless errors. I'm not going back to check my work. Maybe I'm struggling with some timing issues. So that can also give you some good insight into, what can you do to help improve your overall. Now, from your summary report, we're going to jump in to the online PSAT score report. And this, we're going to go through a sample one, just like we did with the summary score report. But this is going to give you a lot more detail. You're going to be able to see the actual test questions. You'll get a link to Khan Academy for online prep. And you can also check out, you should be able to see what's called the AP Potential tab. This is a really interesting, cool feature, I think, because what it does is if you click on that, it'll give you a list of all AP courses and an indication of how well you're prepared based on your PSAT results to take some of those AP courses. It'll also give you a list of AP courses offered by your high school. Students, usually after winter break, before we move into spring break, students are sitting down with their counselors, with their families to set up their schedules for the following year. So this might give you a little insight into planning out your course that might be interesting for you. But going back to those top 10 college admissions factors, looking at increasing your rigor in your curriculum, and an AP course can be a great way to do that. All right, so as we look at this sample online score reports, you're going to see still the same. And I'm going to see those familiar, the section scores. I'm going to see those benchmarks. I'm actually going to see a neat feature here, projected range of SAT scores. So the PSAT, remember, is a great predictor for what do my future SAT scores look like. Maybe the SAT isn't the test for me. I'll also see those green, yellow, red benchmarks. And now for each of these scores, and we'll go through not all 15 of them here, you're now going to see those 2 percentiles that I talked about earlier. So the first one is the one that we talked about on the nationally representative sample percentile. And then you're going to see the PSAT NMSQT user percentile. And what that does is your scores to students who took the PSAT 10 or the PSAT NMSQT in the last 3 school years, in the past 3 school years. So it's a little bit better indicator of how your score compared with student the PSAT over the last few years. Then we get that further breakdown. So we're going to see those 3 test scores. Those are those 8 through 38 scores. And I'm also going to see those 2 percentiles for my test scores as well too. Now I'm going to start seeing some of these scores that students tend to overlook, but are actually pretty insightful. There are certain questions on all 4 of all 4 parts of the essay will contribute to these analysis in science and analysis in history and social studies. So if I'm a student that maybe has an interest in studying science in college or social sciences in college, I can see am I maybe strong in one area, but maybe this tells me, oh, maybe I should do a little bit more work in this area. And again, you're going to see those 2 percentiles, the user one and the nationally representative sample one. And finally, you'll see these subscores. I really love these subscores. Now, I teach the reading and writing sections, and I love using this breakdown because it's really helpful for me and students. You can do this yourself as you're going through your online score report to see areas to improve. So for instance, I can see words in context. My score still fell within the yellow, but it's a little bit on the lower end. So maybe I want to do some vocabulary building, figuring out ways in order to interpret unknown words within the context of the reading. And this is you don't only need for your PSAT or SAT for anything else, but it's a great skill that you'll need in life. Same thing with standard English conventions. Maybe you need to brush up on some of those grammar rules that you learned, way back in when you were in elementary school or middle school. Of excellent information. I'll tell you some very specific areas to work on. And of course, you'll see those familiar percentiles for each of those subscores as well. All right, now as we overview, and we're just going to look at the reading one, but this will look the same for the writing and language and for math, no calc, and math calculator. So I'm going to see similar data that I saw on my summary report. I'll see my total number of questions. I'll see my correct answers. I'll see my incorrect, the number I omitted. I'll see that test questions key, easy, medium, hard. And then what's really great, there's a little bit, another piece of data. If I want to see which questions contributed to some of those subscores or those two cross social studies or the sciences. I can see which questions related to those. And then what I can do is I can click on one of the numbers. So I'm going to click on number 2, and I am brought to PSAT. So I can see the passage. So this is the reading. So I can see the complete passage. I can see the question. So I see in the context of the passage, the use of the word ruptured. So this is a word in context. Line 14 serves main. So I can go back, I can say, okay, I'm looking for that word ruptured. I come over here, I find it in line 14, and I read a little bit before, I read a little bit after to give me the context. And then I can see my answer choice. So I had selected, that was not correct. The correct answer choice is D. So I'll get that little red X and the little green check. And then what the PSAT does, and I just think this is, again, just such a great study tool, is it gives me an explanation of why the correct choice was correct. So that helps me understand reasoning, what's the thought process. And it also tells me why the other answer choices were incorrect. And perhaps I could see myself maybe, falling for a distractor, or maybe I can see that my line of reasoning wasn't what it should be. So you can and go through for all of the questions that you missed on all 4 sections and see what what the correct answer was and why it was correct. So again, this is another excellent tool for helping you understand your PSAT. Now, switching gears a little, National Merit Scholarship, because that's another important use of the PSAT, NMSQT, and only juniors can qualify. So juniors taking the PSAT in the fall of their junior year, typically October, are the ones that can qualify for the scholarship, which goes throughout their senior year. So just a quick reminder, you're going to be looking for your selection index, and this is how it's calculated, and it's based on those 8 through 38 test scores. And you can see the 2 formulas on there. I won't go through the math again. And the cutoff, the national, can change a little from year to year and also state by state. So the most recent data that we had was the cutoff for Florida was a 216. That's out of 228, and that was for the class of 2023, so this year's seniors. Now, going through National Merit Scholarship competition, now I'm going to give you the very much a simplified version, but if you go to nationalmerit.org, O-R-G, and if you go to competition FAQs, they do an excellent detailed breakdown to describe what are the next steps of the competition. So first of all, in October, about 1.5 million, a little more, of juniors will sit for the PSAT and NMSQT. And then in April, about 50,000 are going to qualify for recognition, and that's based on that selection index. And those students will be notified of their senior year whether they are going to move on in the competition as a semifinalist, so it's going to be about 16,000, or if they will, the competition will end for them there, and that will be 34,000 will be commended students, which is still want to put on your college application or on a resume. Now, what happens to those semifinalists? So about 15,000 of them are going to be notified that they are finalists in February, but in between September and February, the students are engaged in a number of things in order to bring them to that final spot. They have to be endorsed by a school official. They have to fill out an application, which includes an essay. They do have to take a corroborating SAT or ACT score, and they'll use a similar selection index to make sure that that T matches up to that qualifying PSAT. And I think I got that all. And then they'll find out in February that most of them will go on to be finalists. And then in March, about 8,400, so a little bit more than half of those original 16,000 semifinalists will be notified that they are merit scholarship winners. And for students who are moving through this throughout the college application process, they can certainly indicate that they are semifinalists when they're sending out their applications. By the time that they're notified that they're finalists, in most instances, they have submitted all of their applications, but they can definitely update the colleges if they moved on to the next round. And certainly in March, they will certainly want to notify any colleges that they have also been recognized as a merit scholarship winner. Now, PSAT and the SAT, and how do they compare? So we're starting to now move a little bit beyond freshman, sophomore, and junior year and start thinking about that next step as we think about the PSAT and its use in the college admissions process. So maybe these scores, I'm starting to think about college admissions. So how does my PSAT compare to my SAT? So because the PSAT is slightly easier and shorter than the SAT, it does have a slightly lower scale, although it is composed of old SAT. And you can also see here, if we compare the PSAT, so the PSAT, you get 60 minutes for reading, 35 minutes for writing and language, 25 minutes for math, no calculator, and 45 minutes for math with calculator. And if we compare that to the SAT you'll notice that the reading is a few minutes longer, has a few more questions. The math no calculator has a few more questions. And then the math with calculator is longer and also has a few more questions. But if you're comfortable with the PSAT format, you SAT as well, and just be aware that there's a few more questions, a little bit more difficulty in the questions, and also it's a slightly longer test. Both measure very similar skills, critical thinking, writing and language, math. Those breakdown of those 15 scores that we looked at earlier, the 3 primary scores, and then the 12 cross-section and sub-scores, you're going to see a very similar report on your SAT report, and they're also scored on a common scale, with your SAT being a higher scale because it is longer and more difficult. Now, the PSAT will not be used in college admissions, so the colleges won't see your PSAT results, but it's a great starting point to think about your pretty. And as we reviewed in the top 10 factors in college admission, the SAT and the ACT, if we group together the upward trend in grades and the rigor of curriculum as one, so those are the school. The SAT and ACT can be the second most important factor, academic factor in college admissions. So now if we're thinking about college admissions, so now when we're talking about college admissions, we'll switch gears a little and start talking using SAT and ACT, because my peers is going to be seen by the colleges, but again, they're going to give me a lot of insight into the preparation that I might want to take in order to take an SAT or ACT. So the SAT and ACT, in addition to being a factor in college admission, can also impact other areas of the college. It can include offers of merit scholarships, admission to select honors programs, and also the SAT and ACT can also be used as placement, meaning if you have a certain score in reading and writing, you might start in an intro class or in a more advanced one, likewise with math. So they're used in a number of ways in addition to being a factor in whether or not you're going to get into college. And just to compare, going back to the PSAT, you can see the national average from this past school. College Board releases the average scores from the previous school year. So you can see these are the PSAT averages from 2021, 2022, so the previous academic year, and they're broken down by section total score, and also by grade. So we talked about those percent to the nationally representative, the user percentile, and this is another good piece of data. You can find this right on College Board's website just to see where your scores fall in terms of the national average. Now, another question that students will also often ask as they're working towards an SAT and ACT is, well, what's a good score? What score do I need for college admissions? And the answer is, it really depends. It really depends on your college list. So, because we work with a lot of Florida students, I imagine we have a lot of in our audience. These were the fall 2022 admission statistics for our 12 state universities. This is also on one of our handouts that you can download, along with some additional detail like GPA and some of the application requirements. But you can see here, admitted to UCF, their mid-range of the SAT was a 1250 to 1370, and the mid-50 for the ACT was a 26 to 30. So if I've got my PSAT, I can look at that online score report. I can see my PSAT score. I know it's a little lower because it's a different at that predicted score and think, okay, I really want to work towards admission to this college. So I can kind of set my goals for what will be a good SAT or ACT score for me. The Bright Future Scholarship, I talked about earlier how the Florida State universities continue to require tests. So does our popular Bright Futures scholarships. They continue to require the SAT or ACT. And there are two levels of the Bright Futures scholarships. You can't apply for this until the senior year. So this application opens up on October 1st. And in order to be, there are two tiers of scholarship. The Florida Academic Scholarship is 100% of tuition and fees based on a public institution, so one of those 12 state university system schools, or the Florida Scholarship, which is 75% of tuitions and fees, again, also based on the public institution's tuition. And you can see here there is a recalculated core GPA, 3.5 or 3.0, depending on the level. And then the test scores are always going to be considered. Those who are receiving an IB diploma or an ACE diploma, they don't necessarily need to have these test scores, but they do need them for the colleges to which they're applying. And you can see here, in order to earn that higher tier, the FAS, for this year's graduates, those students need a 1330 on the SAT or a 29 on the ACT. And then class of 2024, actually that SAT score goes up by 10 points for this year's juniors. And then for the Florida Medallion Scholars, you need an SAT of 1210 and an ACT of 25. There's a community service or paid work component, and it's an either or, so 100 hours of community service or 100 hours of paid work. And then for FMS, 75 hours of service or 100 hours of paid work. This is a very attractive scholarship and it's available to students who are Florida residents who are graduating in the state of Florida. Again, there are a couple of exceptions there, and you can just check it out. If you just type Bright Futures into your web browser, you'll be able to see all the requirements and then some. And then certainly lastly, kind of continuing with that discussion of thinking about, I have my some of these national university in mind. What would be a good SAT or ACT score to target? And these are some popular schools, popular with the students that we work with in college counseling. And you can see, and then the mid-50 SAT and the ACT. And this was taken from U.S. News and World Report. This was from their most recent publication, which just came out a couple months ago. But the data is from the students who started in the previous year in 20. And so U.S. News and World Report does offer just a lot of data in all one place. So it can be a good resource as you're beginning your college search. Now, another question that comes up is which test do I take? SAT, ACT, college, this college prefers the SAT and doesn't like the ACT. And so we hear that all the time. And the fact of the matter is, SAT, ACT, truly the choice is yours. Colleges treat both tests exactly the same. So really, you can go back and look at your and you can determine, yeah, I did great on my PSAT. I like the format of the test. Yes, we know there's going to be a switch to a digital format. That's upcoming. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later in tonight's presentation. But for right now, especially if I'm a junior, great. I really like that SAT. Or maybe I just struggled with my PSAT. I didn't like the reading sections. I didn't like some of those inference-based questions that I saw. Maybe I want to check out an ACT. So now's a great time, whether you're in ninth grade, 10th grade, definitely if you're a junior, to start thinking about what's going to be your testing path. Am I going to look at ACT? Maybe I'm a student that's decided that, that standardized tests are challenging for me for whatever reason, and I might be pursuing a test optional or test blind path. Now, if you want to figure out which is a better test for you, SAT. So you can start out, you got your PSAT scores, and then you can compare those to an ACT experience. Whether you're sitting for an actual ACT, maybe you're taking a simulated, a mock test. So that's a good practice. Once you take, or even if you want to use those predicted scores on your PSAT online report, you can look at a concordance table. You can just Google it, and you can see how does my SAT score compare to my ACT score, and then I can say, oh yeah, I did much better on the ACT. I'm going to stick with that test. He was stronger. Just so that we always offer, usually it's 2 per month, one SAT, one ACT simulations. That's through us, through Score at the Top. They are virtual. They are offered on Saturday mornings at the same time that you would test by going down to your local high school. Only you can do it from the comfort of your kitchen or dining room table. It is proctored, and you do get back a score report. And if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to our freesimulation.com. You could also get a more detailed CT assessment. And I'll pause for a moment if you wanted to grab a screenshot. So that's our SAT and ACT decision plan, and that is for EV. But that's also a good way to analyze taking an SAT, parts of an SAT and ACT side by side to see which of for you. Now, thinking about a good testing calendar, and this is also one of our downloads as well too, so you don't need to memorize my screens, but I'll talk a little in depth here. So juniors, so it's December and you have your PSAT scores, and let's say you've decided I want to take the ACT. So you have a few upcoming dates to choose from in the spring of your junior year, February, April, June, and July. And the 2 tests that I've hired are what are the test information release tests. So for an additional fee, you can get a copy of your test, your answers, and then the correct answers. And again, it's a great study tool, especially if you're taking an ACT for the first time line. You can look at this and you can see, similar to what we viewed for the PSAT, although you don't get the answer explanations like the PSAT gives you. But this is a great tool to really compare what were the correct scores, and then you can go back, you can refer to, oh yeah, maybe I should read a little bit further in order to identify that word in context. Now, let's say you've determined I'm going to stick with the SAT. I liked my PSAT. The SAT is the test for me. So coming ones in the spring of your junior year. This schedule doesn't include a school day SAT which most juniors will sit for sometime between March and April of junior year. These are all national Saturday morning test dates, ACT as well too. Some school districts also administer a district-wide ACT. So you can keep an eye out from your school counselor, your guidance counselor for more information about when those tests are scheduled. But let's say I'm a junior and I'm taking the SAT. So I've got March, May, June, and then just usually the start of my senior year. And the two tests that are highlighted, you can get the QAS. So you get a copy of the test, your answers, and the correct answers. Not the same level of detail as the PSAT, where you do get the breakdown of why this was correct, why this was incorrect. But again, another great way to study and prepare. And then if you need to, in the fall of your senior year, you can test again. There are tests offered in, in October, November, and December for if you need to get a higher score, and just always be mindful of college application deadlines and when the colleges need those results from those particular tests. As you start mapping out your testing calendar, you can do it on your fridge calendar, on your family electronic calendar, but you can start thinking today, what are going to be some of those dates for your future tests. So you have your PSATs. And so if you want to take an ACT, we typically recommend waiting towards the end of your sophomore year, because that gives you the chance to have another full year of your high school career. So that's another year of math, and that's another year of courses that are going to help you do well on the reading and writing sections of both the SAT and the ACT. So usually a good test for if sophomores are interested in taking the ACT, a good test to shoot for might be that one where they get out of school, so that June 10th test for 2023. And again, that's one of the TIRs. So you can get your test and the correct and your answers. And if you're going to take the SAT, and I'll mention that in a moment. So if you're going to take the SAT, definitely do some preparation over the summer, and probably that late August one, so right at the start of your junior year, would be a great time to take the SAT. You won't have answer service, but you will have a chance to take the SAT after having that full second year of your high school curriculum. Now, for our domestic students, so students here in the United States, the PSAT is moving to a digital format 2023. So sophomores, if you are sitting for the PSAT, you should be taking it in a digital format. And then if you take the SAT, these dates are still the paper-based ones, as will be the fall 2023. So through that December test, the SAT will still be paper-based, even though it's to digital. However, in the spring of 2024, so current sophomores will then be juniors, you will be taking an SAT in its new digital format. Now, we'll be scheduling a future presentation to cover that more in depth, but I just wanted to make mention of that, especially for sophomores. If you're more comfortable with a paper-based test, you might want to consider preparing for or checking out the ACT, which right now has not indicated that they're moving away from their current format. So hopefully it was clear. And that's just a little heads up for sophomores, but my current juniors, your tests are going to remain paper-based, or your SAT will. And then, of course, sophomores, you'll likely be testing again as a junior to get the scores that you want, either for scholarships, for honors programs, etc. Now, another question that we get from our students all the time, and this is a good time to think about this, even if your SAT or ACT is maybe many months from now, is, well, when should I send scores to colleges? Should I take advantage of those 4 reports that I see when I fill out an ACT or SAT registration? So we recommend that you wait until your senior year to send score reports because you don't want to send your scores blind. You don't want to send scores without knowing your results. And you also want to make sure you have time to take the tests that you need to take so you know which scores you're sending. And another question that comes up is, how do I send scores to colleges? And in light of that test optional landscape, in addition to having an impact on admissions, and these increased numbers of applications, it also changed a little bit how students can now get a score to colleges. Before, it just simply had to be, all right, I'm ready to send scores to colleges. I log into my College Board account, I log into my ACT, my $12, $16, and I send my scores out. More and more colleges are moving over to a self-reporting model, meaning students can self-report on their application. They can self-report on their applicant portal, which is what they have access to after they apply. They can upload of their PDFs. So there's a number of ways that students can now get scores to colleges. And at the end of the day, whether you're sending an official score report, whether you're self-reporting, you always want to follow the college's requirements about which score sets to send. Some colleges will ask for a single best score set. Where do I get this information? I go to the college admissions site and I check out admission or application requirements, admission requirements. Usually there's a separate tab for sending scores. And so definitely follow the college's requirements. Some colleges will say, we want to see all scores from every test that you've taken, SAT or ACT. Some colleges will allow you to send the best score sets. So this is what's called score choice. And in the instances where a college asks you to send all score sets, in most instances, this means that the college is going to super score your test. So what does a super score look like? So I'm just going to use the SAT since it's only 2 section scores versus ACT's 4. So let's say I sit for the SAT and I get a 600 in reading and a 700 in math. So then I sit for the SAT in August and I get a 700 reading and a 650 in math. So for colleges that super score, I would send both those sets of scores for my June, and the colleges would basically pick those 2 highest scores. So I made it easy for myself, 700, 700. So my new recalculated super score would be a 1400, which is nice. Now, students don't self-calculate their own super scores. They just send or self-report those complete set of scores, and then they do that on their end. But that's a nice feature. So that's why you want to wait until your senior year when you're done testing or close to completed with testing before you start sending out or self-reporting your test scores. And of course, remember, and this is important, for test optional college, the choice about sending scores is yours. And indeed, we've seen students make that determination on a college by college level. So I might send scores to one college. I might decide to go test optional for another college. And of course, regardless of whether you're ACT, you absolutely must prepare. And definitely one of the key factors as you prepare for tests is making sure that you're doing timed practice. I always tell students you can get really familiar with the test, but if you're not practicing it within those 60 minutes if I'm doing a PSAT reading or 65 minutes if I'm doing an SAT reading, I don't want to accidentally run out of time when I'm actually sitting for it on a Saturday morning. Definitely doing a test simulation, a proctored test simulation. Again, we've got those free simulations. It's another great way to practice and again get the stamina that goes into sitting for a 3+ hour test on a Saturday morning. And definitely making sure that you're using previously released tests. So the College Board has released a good number of tests, so has ACT. You can find it in colleges, the big blue book, and then ACT's got, and that'll also help you familiarize with kind of the style of the test and what types of questions you might anticipate seeing. Of course, we would be honored if you would consider us for your test prep needs. We offer one-on-one test prep. We do small group workshops, and we're available for in-person or. And as we come to the end of tonight's presentation, which we've talked about your PSAT, we've talked about looking at standardized testing, talked a little bit about the college admissions process, now is a great time to start planning. And what are some of the things that I can do? So first of all, I can begin researching colleges. Honestly, it's never too early to start researching colleges and even visiting colleges. I remember when my older daughter, who's now in her 20s, when she was a sophomore, we're going to visit some family. Let's go check out a college. Let's do a visit. We always had a lot of fun doing them. Another great piece of information as we start thinking about those test scores, what are those mid 50 when I was showing you some of the national universities and also the floor, is checking out a college's freshman class profile and realize it can change a little bit from year to year. Typically the scores and GPAs tend to get a bit higher from year to year, but not dramatically so. So if you go to the freshman class profile, go to the one that's actually on the college's own site. Usually it's right on their admissions page, just up to date, because usually it's for that either that starting year's class or the previous year's class, so it's really up to date. And you can see the GPA, the average GPA, you can see test score averages, you can see where students come from, demographics, what were some of the areas where students, extracurriculars that students were involved with in high school. So familiarize yourself by checking out those freshman class profiles. Now is also a great time as we're coming towards the end of first semester, whether you're ninth grade, 10th grade, juniors, is to take a look at those, knowing that those are so important in college admissions. So check out your current GPA. And we do have other presentations. You can watch the recordings, and we always do them throughout the year, and we talk about how colleges review a student's application. You can start out by looking at your overall GPA. Where would you like it to be? Start setting some goals. What does your curriculum look like? Are you challenging yourself? Again, finding that balance. We don't want students to be stressed out. We want that good balance. But maybe you've been very successful in honors level courses. Check out maybe one of those AP classes. Going back to that AP potential tab that you can use on your online PSAT score report. Maybe check out a couple of those classes. Those might be interesting if they're offered to you in your high school. Look at your extracurricular engagement. A great time to be checking out different clubs, different involvement. Sophomores and juniors, now you're sort of looking into that depth of involvement, taking on more leadership roles, taking on initiative. If your high school doesn't have a club that you've always wanted, start one. See if you can start one. Everyone should have their PSAT score reports in front of them, so you've got at least one good set of test scores, and you can go through and start mapping out, what are going to be my next steps when it comes to standardized testing. And of course, we be very happy for you to reach out. In addition to college counseling and SAT prep, we also offer courses for credit. So if you wanted to take one of those AP courses but can't fit it into your schedule, we are fully accredited and can offer you those. And we also offer subject area tutoring. And coming up next week, we two of our awesome, amazing test prep instructors going through the PSAT. So the one that you got back, I think they go through problem by problem. So we're going to have the math review. That's going to be on December 13th. That's going to be at 6 o'clock. We're also going to have the reading and writing review, and that'll be on December 15th at 6 p.m. You probably got an email from us letting you know of those dates. You can sign up for these on scorewebinars.com, and we'd be happy to see you at that. And that's another great opportunity. You know, another excellent, if you're not sure if that answer explanation didn't answer your question, well, ask one of our master test prep tutors and they can help you out. For our juniors, and actually for students that might be wanting to jumpstart a little of the SAT, we have our very popular SAT workshop, which is offered at Suncoast High School, although we may offer a virtual section if enough students sign up. You don't need to be a Suncoast student to attend Suncoast. It's open to all students. It is 7 Saturday morning sessions starting January 7th, 2023, and it includes 2 simulations. We have one at the beginning, one at the end, which gives you a really nice way to measure progress. Lots and lots of practice. There's time homework assigned every week. And if you'd like more information about that, you can go to suncoasttestprep.com. I'll pause a moment there. And jumping a little bit further ahead, now that you've heard me talk about college admissions, we would love to welcome you to our college admissions boot camp, which I lead with my dear friend Leventhal, another one of the educational consultants on our team. I think this is going to be our 10th annual one. And we offer this in the summertime, usually in the summertime, early fall. We don't have dates set yet because this will be sometime August, September 2023. But we do every year. Students are filling out their applications, writing their essays, meeting with essay experts for reviews, working on resume drafts. It's a great experience, I think, for the students, and we love teaching it. So if you'd like up-to-date information, again, we don't have the dates yet for 2020. You can request information at scorebootcamp.com. And then, of course, we always have a ton of admission webinars available free for viewing 24/7 at our Score Webinars site. And these are updated annually. So, for instance, our ever popular, led by our company founder, Judy Rabinovitz, certified educational planner, always does a fabulous webinar all about the 12 Florida State University schools. It's updated every year, usually in the fall. And you can watch this year's recording. Recording will also be available in a couple of days. And of course, we'd be delighted and honored if you would tell your friends about us. You can check us out at scoreatthetop.com. And then I'll pause here, and actually, let me just pause on this screen, and then I'm going to flip the chat just so you can see our contact information here. And then I'm just going to go.
Kathy, Hi, yes. Kathy.
Hi.
I actually answered a bunch of the questions, but there are some there for you. I just also wanted to add that in addition to the Suncoast workshop, we're also doing workshops at Taravella, Coral Glades, Taravella and Coral Glades. So it's coralgladestestprep.com and taravellatestprep.com for anyone in the Coral Springs or Parkland area. But I'll ask you the questions so you don't have to figure out which one's already answered.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Can you just confirm, was 216 the cutoff for NMSQT?
Yeah, and that was for last year. That was 2023. So I don't think they've released yet the cutoff for this year's yet, but that was last year's.
Right.
Usually they don't vary too much from year in a couple of points.
And do you know if a ACT super score can act as a confirming score?
Yes, you can. Now, I think it's for the corroborating score, it has to be, and I'll double check this out as part of our follow-up, but the best of my understanding, it has to be a single one-time score from either SAT or ACT to corroborate. Because what they'll do is they'll take that ACT score, and they'll compare it to the and they recalculate that selection index and that's how they can compare it, the PSAT to the ACT or to the SAT by doing that selection index score. hopefully I answered that correctly. If I didn't, and I'll drop my email in the chat as well too. And you can always follow up with me directly. I'm always happy to answer questions.
Here's a question I could probably answer a little bit easier than you can. Is someone asked about how to prep for the digital SAT once it goes digital. Now, College Board has released their own app called the Blue Book app. You can download it from their website. And there are 8 digital adaptive SATs on the Blue Book app to allow you to practice. In addition, there's going to be some test prep material released through Khan Academy. And Score at the Top has partnered with a couple of other great test prep companies from around the country to develop our own digital adaptive testing platform. The name of that company is called Assessive, and we'll be releasing our product sometime next year. Let's see here. My son scored a 1300 based on the score analysis. We know that he has to improve his reading score. Oh, wait, I did this one already. Is it possible to increase by 200 points? I said it is, but it's going to be extremely difficult to go up, especially in one section. Do you provide sessions focusing on reading and writing only? We do.
Yep.
Our prep is 100% customized when it's private, so you can do whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
Is it possible to partially qualify for Bright Futures even if a score is lower than the required score? Is there a score for paying college tuition less than 10%?
So for the first part, I'm not sure if I quite understand the second part, but for the first one, no, you have to meet for that slide that and that's
it was supposed to be less than 100%.
Oh, so there's for the 75%. So there's 2 different standards. Actually, here, I can go back quickly and find. Actually, no, I can just do it from the top of my head. Yeah. So if I want to qualify for the Florida Medallion Scholarship, which is a partial tuition, it's the requirements are going to be a little lower. So it's going to be a recalculated GPA of 3.0. My SAT will be a 1210 compared to a 1330 in order to get the full amount, or my ACT is going to be a 25. And then my service or work hours are going to look a little different. I have to have 75 community service hours for FMS or 100 paid work hours for FMS. And then for the full one, the requirements across the board are going to be a little higher. So I need a 3.5, a 1330 or a 29 community service, or 100 hours of paid work. So you have to meet all 3 of those areas in order to get the scholarships, to receive the different levels of scholarships. I think that's what the question was asking.
I believe you're correct.
Okay, good. If I'm not, you can always email me and I'll be happy to help.
And I think the last question, at least for right now, is said, my son got a 192 on the NMQST index, and they said he qualifies. If the cutoff is 216, how can he qualify?
Yeah, so, well, of course, that was last year's qualifier score. So what'll happen is if he's in fact qualified, is his guidance counselor, and that was one of the things that I forgot to say. I was like, I knew there was one little piece do as they move through the national merit competition, all of those steps moving from, recognized to semifinalist to finalist. They're taking the steps through their school. Their school is giving them all that information. So if he's in fact qualified and he does make the cutoff for to enter that competition, to write that essay, to fill out the application, his high school will notify him of that in September of his senior year. So yeah, so it won't be known until then.
Is the Bright Futures GPA weighted or unweighted?
It's weighted, and it's a different weighting than is used possibly for your high school, which high school weighting can be all over the place. Anywhere I've seen anywhere from like a half a point all the way up to 2 points. The Bright Futures, they look at 16 core areas. So there's primarily a student's academic core, and then the weighting is a little lower. I think for any AP ACE courses, honors, I'd have to double check yeah, they get like a half.
It's a quarter point per semester of
Mhm.
honors, AP, ACE, or dual enrollment. They're all treated equally.
Equally, yeah.
And if you aren't quite there, they will pick up 2 additional courses to add in to see if that puts you over the top. But they'll typically want to grab like 2 AP courses for the weighting if you have them. But it's strictly core curriculums, and it's 16 courses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and core curriculum is your English, math, science, social sciences, world languages. So those academic.
If someone qualifies as a semifinalist, what score is needed on the SAT or ACT to substantiate?
So that would be, I'd have to do the math there, but that would have to be it would have to meet that, not making myself very clear here, that would have to meet that that cutoff score or better. And so they would do that selection index recalculation. If you go to the national merit, we'll probably explain this a lot more directly than I am here. If you go to nationalmerit.org and you check out their competition steps FAQ, and your student will also receive a booklet that will give them, let's see, that details step by step throughout the process. It doesn't say, I'm actually taking a peek at it right now. It doesn't say like what the score would be. It just says NMSC will use your SAT or ACT scores to calculate a selection index score. This places your SAT or ACT performance on the same scale as the NMSC selection index score from the PSAT NMSQT, which qualified you for recognition as a semifinalist. So hopefully that their wording is a little bit clearer than mine. So yeah, so they do have to match essentially. It's, you know, going to look a little different there.
Oh, Kathy, I think that's all we got for now.
All right. Well,
thank you very much.
Yes, well, thank you, Jason. It was a pleasure seeing, well, I didn't see anyone this evening, but seeing all your chats, and thank you for attending, and hope everyone has a wonderful, happy holiday season. Enjoy your upcoming winter breaks. And if I missed any questions, you have Jason's email. He sends out all of our marketing pieces. And you can also contact me. It's Hart, H-A-R-T, at J. It's scrolling across the end, scrolling right across the screen, so you can reach out to us, and we look forward to hearing from you. So hope everyone has a great evening, and everyone take care. Thank you so much for attending.
Thanks, everybody. Happy